Do you ever just like come home from work or school and you're really tired and you decide, hey, I'm gonna take a nap, and maybe it'll be like 30 minutes or maybe I'll do it for an hour. Yeah, I did that today and I slept for like 4 hours, so I'm making this video way later than it probably should be, but you know, F it, we ball, I guess. But hello and welcome back to the channel, and today I'm gonna do something a little different from what I normally do. Usually I make like shorter videos where I'm just like shooting the shit while playing a game in the background, but for this I feel like my thoughts need to be slightly more coherent. So instead of that, I actually have pre-recorded footage of just me doing the pinnacle for the legendary campaign weekly mission, and it's the final mission of the campaign, so that's kind of fitting actually. But yeah, today I wanted to talk about like my impressions, just generally speaking, about Lightfall and to a lesser extent Season of Defiance in terms of the story and also the gameplay stuff. And I guess, you know, for the thing that people probably care more about opinions, I'll start with the story. I have like almost an hour of background footage recorded for this, but I'm not sure how much I'm actually going to use depending on how long I talk. So, but I think regardless, this video is going to be longer than the videos that I normally make. All right, well, to get right into it, I think it's generally agreed upon in the community that the story for Lightfall is it has some issues, to say the least. But also, just in case you for some reason needed me to say this, there are going to be spoilers for the story for Lightfall and Season of Defiance in this video. So if you for some reason haven't done that and you play Destiny and you're watching this video, what are you doing? But also, and just one more like housekeeping thing, this video is not going to be me like just dumping on the game or like blindly praising it and like not acknowledging some of its faults. But yeah, this is not like super angry Reddit thread paragraphs. But yeah, like I said, to jump into the story portion of the expansion, it's very obvious at this point that you know, a lot of people's big gripe with the story is that, you know, they don't explain what a bunch of these random MacGuffins are in the story. And not only is that like annoying to veteran players that are like invested in the lore, but it's also like what is the word I'm looking for? Discombobulate. It's just confusing for newer players who jumped into the game with Lightfall. You know, Lightfall, despite its problems, is the most like popular Destiny 2 has ever been, you know, like record player numbers and whatnot. But yeah, I feel like a lot of new people were like turned off by the game because the story made no sense, because it's like everybody plays the campaign when it comes out, because I mean, you don't have to, but you kind of have to, especially if they release something like a new subclass or whatnot. Yeah, the narrative lost a lot of people who were new to the game in a game that already has a just disjointed narrative, because, you know, big portions of the game's story get cut and seasonal story stuff gets cut every year. It's, you know, there's a whole conversation I can get into about that, but for the sake of this, I'll just leave it at that. But with Lightfall specifically, I think the story is, you know, to give it some credit, is coherent up until like when, spoiler alert, Rohan dies. And I feel like after that, they're kind of like rushing to the finish line because the campaign is only 8 missions. But I feel like just generally, like, people were expecting a lot more to do with like the Traveler and the Witness and big story beats that were supposed to pay off, but instead it focused on like, you know, the Cloud Striders and the discovery of Strand, and I feel like what most people were expecting out of this was like, I don't remember where I heard this analogy, but like basically Lightfall was marketed as like the sort of Infinity War to Final Shape's Endgame, you know, type thing, where, you know, the Final Shape is going to be like the big conclusion to the major story arc that's been happening for the past 10 years. And, you know, it was very obvious that like Lightfall was supposed to be like well, I mean, the expansion is called Lightfall, you know, it was expected that like, oh, we're probably not going to like do super well in terms of like the story and lore in terms of what happens. But yeah, I feel like what was marketed in terms of like the story and what we got are like very like two different things, if that wasn't obvious enough. And this is just going off on another tangent here really quick. In terms of the voice acting for both the expansion and the season, I feel like, you know, it's very good for the most part, except for a few times with some of Osiris's lines. I don't know why. It feels like I don't know how to describe it. Like, I don't want to sound rude, but occasionally it feels like Osiris is like, his voice lines are being like AI generated. Like, there's a point near the beginning where something about the way like he enunciates things, or like, I don't remember what the word is, but it feels like unnatural to like a way, at least to me, that like a person would normally speak in a way in like a situation like that. And there's also, is it Headlong or is it Breakneck? I don't remember what the mission is, but the mission where you use Strand and you're in the boss room with the rotating death wall. But yeah, there's a line or two in that I feel like is also like it's an odd read, and it just doesn't sound like normal. Like it either sounds like it's AI generated, or it sounds like they took different line reads and then like spliced them together. I don't know if that's probably not actually true, but that's just what it, like, when I hear it, that's what it like reminds me of. You know, I feel like with the story, they wanted to like tell this like narrative about like the Cloud Striders and Strand, but they also needed to tell us the story about like, you know, the Witness and the Traveler, and then it just kind of got like muddled together, and they focused on things that I'm not gonna say nobody cares about, but like it was very much not like what people were expecting. Like, this is the penultimate like chapter of the current major storyline, and like, you know, super important things and characters like, you know, the Witness, the Veil, Callus. I'll get to Callus in a second. Feel like we don't learn anything, which is, I feel like, the biggest like criticism people have. It's like, we don't learn what the Radial Mast is, we don't learn what the Veil is, but slowly over time we're learning about like little things about it in like some missions and whatnot, like exotic missions. And there's a whole bunch of like theories and videos online that attempt to explain like what the Veil like generally is, but I lost my train of thought. This is what happens when I make videos at 11 p.m. But yeah, I feel like with the story they wanted to tell and the expectations of what the community wanted, like, there's so much that they needed to do that I feel like 8 missions is just not long enough, which is weird because Witch Queen is like generally regarded as like one of the best stories in an expansion, maybe besides like Forsaken and Taken King, and that was also only 8 missions long. But I guess the narrative was just more focused, and it had a bunch of cool lore drops and whatnot. But I spoke about Osiris a little bit, but I guess I'll jump into like individual characters, and just speaking more about Osiris for just a second. It's very clear what they're going for with Osiris is like, he's slightly like, I guess frustrated is the word I would use, you know, being lightless and like people not like trusting in his abilities to like still get stuff done and whatnot. So when he's like faced with like failure, he gets like real upset, which is like understandable. But it's like, when we don't know as a player like what we're doing and why we're doing it, like it's like, why is the Veil important, and like Osiris is like screaming at us to like, you know, to do the thing, and like, why aren't we good with Strand and whatnot? Like, it just comes off as like annoying to the player. Granted, I think Osiris for the most part in his expansion is fine, but that's like a point of contention that I've heard about Osiris's character in the expansion. I think Rohan, for the most part, is like an alright character, but I feel like, I don't know, like it's very obvious that he was like going to die, especially when he brings up that Cloud Striders only live for 10 years and he's on his 10th year. So it's like, okay, they're probably gonna kill him off, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing, but I feel like because we don't learn what the Radial Mast is or how it links to the Veil and why that's bad, but everybody else seems to have at least a better idea of why, makes Rohan's death like less impactful. And we also, for, I think the bigger point of that is like, we also don't spend a ton of time with him, you know, with the campaign only being 8 missions and a lot of it being to do with Strand and not with like Neomuna and the Cloud Striders and whatnot. But I think Rohan, just like as a character that shows up for the little bit that he does, is actually like, I think he's fine. Now, Nimbus, a lot of people really don't like Nimbus, and there's a point or two that I'm gonna get to about specifically why. But I think besides that point, like at the end, I think Nimbus, I don't hate Nimbus like a lot of people do. You know, a lot of people find his voice annoying and like, yeah, I get it, I guess. But it's also like, my only issue with his voice is that the like distortion on his voice, like the effect that they put over it, can sometimes like, sometimes I can't understand what he's actually saying, and then like I have to rely on the subtitles to actually understand him. But I think a lot of people are annoyed with Nimbus because he has like a jokey and like unserious attitude throughout most of the campaign, and it's like people were expecting this story to be a lot more, I don't want to say dark, but a lot more like serious, and maybe grounded isn't the right word, but like people were expecting this story to be like dramatic and serious. I'll just say that, use those words. But you know, with the whole thing being called Lightfall and the witness finally like showing up to wreck shop and everything. But I think it's very clear what they're going for with Nimbus. At least this is how I interpret it anyways, is that the Cloud Striders only live for 10 years. That's established, and that's, you know, very easy to understand because of the heavily augmented cybernetics that they, you know, have implanted into them, you know, to be protectors of Neomuna and whatnot. But so obviously, like, coming to terms with like your very, very limited mortality in like this universe is like, I think it's what they're going for is that like the way Nimbus deals with like his mortality and things like that is that he tries to be lighthearted and jokey and quippy because it's like that's the way he copes with his own mortality. I think, you know, like I guess some people were expecting like the Cloud Striders to be like super serious, and well, I mean, I guess Rohan is mostly serious for the most part, but like maybe like even like depressed or something. I don't really know, but like I think it's obvious that like what Nimbus is doing is like the whole living 10 years thing. I guess people were expecting the Cloud Striders to be like super like dire and serious, and I guess maybe when you first like, you're just thinking about it for a second, like when you first like take that oath to be a Cloud Strider and you're like, all right, you got 10 more years after we do this, it's like maybe some people would be like, I don't know, like I'm losing my train of thought, holy shit, getting my thoughts together. It's very like Nimbus is like what his character is trying to like portray or do is that yes, despite the grave circumstances of not only like the story of the expansion but also like his very limited lifespan, it's like he's very like he I guess he's like making it a point to like, well, I only have 10 years to live, I'm not gonna be, you know, I guess depressed or like down about it. I have 10 years to live, so you know there's no point in being super negative and down all the time. Does that make sense? I hope I can edit that part into something that's like coherent, but I think his attitude as an individual makes sense if you think about it for like 2 seconds. Like I guess you're either like of two minds about like, if as a Cloud Strider it's like, okay, I have to be, it's like I only get to live for 10 years, this sucks, man, but you know I have a duty to uphold and whatnot, so that's like my burden to bear. And I guess Nimbus is on the other end of the spectrum where it's like, I only have 10 years to live, so I might as well, you know, try and be a positive influence, maybe not influence, but like a positive like energy to those around me, because I mean, only got 10 years, don't want to waste it being, you know, moping around and being depressed, especially when I voluntarily took up this role to protect, you know, Neomuna and Neptune and all that. Again, I hope I can edit that into something coherent that makes sense. That's like my general stance on Nimbus for the most part, is that his character makes sense. However, there was a part, this is the like main point, that I personally like kind of have a gripe with his character. It's like, yes, it's obviously that he's using his like non-serious and like jokey persona to like come to terms with like his own mortality and whatnot. But there's a point near the end of the campaign where you fight Callus and he dies, and Keitel is there, and I don't know if it's like mourning is the right word, but she has a moment where she's like, hey, no more running, rest now. And maybe respect, maybe mourning is the right word, but like she's having a moment, and then Nimbus shows up and he makes a wisecrack joke about how fucking Callus is ugly, and he goes to fist bump her, and she's like, what the fuck are you doing? And it's either that or maybe she just doesn't know what fist bumping is. But I feel like that moment like really encapsulates like what people dislike about Nimbus's character, you know, being jokey in really grave circumstances and in a story that's supposed to be serious. And this is just like my personal take on it. It's like, yeah, that's not like, it comes off as kind of tone deaf, not only from Nimbus as a character, but also from like the writing team, because this is like a super serious moment that's been building up forever, for like the past few years, with Callus and Keitel, and finally having this confrontation. And when it all ends, I feel like they should have like let the room and like the audience and the characters like have a moment. And it's like, we just murdered Keitel's father, and she's like having a moment, and it's like, Nimbus, can you like read the room just a little bit? So that part specifically, I feel like maybe they could have toned back Nimbus's like like personality just a little bit. But yeah, besides that one moment, I feel like Nimbus is fine. I actually like some of the lines he has and some of the post-campaign stuff, and like his character moments and whatnot. Now, I'm gonna talk about the villains next, but I feel like for the Witness, he doesn't really like do anything. He doesn't really like do anything like in terms of his character, although there is one moment that I will get to. But like, he doesn't really do much because he's like in like 3 cutscenes or maybe 4 cutscenes. But I think to talk about the Witness in terms of the expansion story, I'm gonna talk about Callus next. Now, Callus is a character that has been built up in terms of like the story and the lore since like vanilla D1, going all the way back to like the Midnight Coup and stuff like that. But I feel like it's very weird how they handle his character. Like, his character is actually, like, in terms of like his acting and whatnot, I think it's all great. You know, Callus is always one of those characters that I like seeing on screen, or I guess hearing his voice for the most part. But, you know, he has this whole storyline with like wanting to commune with the darkness and whatnot, and like wanting to make sure that he's like one of the last beings alive at the end of the universe and everything. But I feel like, because it's been happening for multiple years, especially with like the build-up of his character in the past few years in the seasons, like what is the mission called? The Press's mission comes to mind especially, and that was like years ago. And I feel like he doesn't get to do as much as like people wanted him to do, and I feel kind of the same way too. Because it's like, okay, he does all this stuff, and I guess he finally kind of gets what he wants in becoming a disciple of, you know, the darkness or the Witness, and it kind of just ends up with him being like a lackey to the Witness, which is odd because I never figured Callus to be the kind of person who would be subservient to anyone. But I don't know. However, there is this really cool moment in the campaign where Callus and the Witness kind of like, I don't know, butt heads is not the right word, because it's more like Callus getting vibe checked by the Witness, basically. But yeah, it's super weird that like all this build up of his character and wanting to like become one with the darkness and whatever ends up with him just being kind of like a lackey, and like the powers that he gets from the Witness seem to be not worth it at all, at least in terms of the gameplay. Like, when you fight Callus in his boss fight at the end of the campaign, it's like, so after everything Callus has done, and after finally becoming a disciple of the Witness, he gets a gun. It's a cool looking gun, don't get me wrong, but like, that is like the culmination of all this devotion and the powers granted to him. And it's like, okay, he has a gun, and he has a cool second phase where he can split the gun into 2 machetes, which is still cool. But like, I was hoping to have Callus be more like bombastic and like opulent, if you will, in terms of like what he gets to do in the expansion, and he kind of just gets to do nothing. I don't know whether I'm upset that you kill him in the campaign, because I don't think I'm just upset that he didn't get to like go wild. Like, I wish they did more with his character before killing him off, because it's like, I don't know. But I will say, I do like the final boss fight, and I like the arena. that it's in, except for the part where you can get knocked off every 5 seconds if you're either next to the boss or Tormentor especially. And if you're not using Strand, then you basically just die. But I mean, I guess it's obvious that they want you to use Strand because there's a thing next to the rally flag and also all the grapple points that are built into the arena. And also, just a side note, I actually like the detail that like the veil is what allows us to like see Strand and wield it. And in the boss fight arena with Callus, where the veil is, it's like there's like a bunch of Strand stuff everywhere because that's like where it originates from and whatnot. But yeah, after all this incoherent rambling about the story and some of its characters, the ending of the expansion is very confusing and weird to me. So the radial mast, which we don't really know what it is, all we know is that the witness can use it to link to the veil, which is bad for some reason. You know, we destroy it, or Rohan destroys it and sacrifices himself to destroy it. And then at the end of the campaign, we beat Callus. And after that moment with Nimbus, the witness possesses our ghost, which he shows the capacity to do not only in Lightfall earlier, but also in like Shadowkeep and Beyond Light. He possesses our ghost again and uses our ghost as like a medium, I guess, to link with the veil. And that causes the witness to open a portal into the Traveler and go through it and take some of the pyramid ships with him. Which, what does that mean? I have no idea because they don't explain it. But basically, we quote unquote lose, and I feel like the way that they handle this is super weird because ignoring the Kvashtav that is used in the cutscene, which I think is hilarious, there's a moment where the witness is linking to the veil with our ghost and the ghost is like flying up in front of it, and Cattle tells us to shoot our ghost so that the witness doesn't link to it. So we pull out our amazing white rarity Kvashtav and point it at our ghost. Which, one, that's super weird that we would even like consider pulling up our gun to our ghost in the first place. But I mean, we do hesitate, I guess, technically. But also, this is just me being dumb and thinking too much about it, or maybe it's just a dumb gameplay contrivance. But like, why couldn't we use Strand and the grappling hook to like snatch our ghost away? That's just something I thought about like ever since I played the campaign for the first time. I was like, there are so many other things we could have done besides shoot our ghost, which obviously we didn't, but the fact that we considered it for a second is again weird. But like, on one hand, it's obviously the witness has shown the capacity to possess our ghost in the past multiple times, but I feel like it kind of, even with that like stipulation stated, it's really weird. And it feels kind of like an ass pull right at the end, just so it's like, oh, we're gonna lose at the end of the campaign because, you know, that's been kind of hinted towards in the marketing and the title of the expansion and whatnot. But it's very weird, and the fact that we don't know what it linking to the Traveler and then going through it with the portal and everything and the veil and the radial mast, we don't know what any of that stuff is. So all this is not only really weird in terms of its like implications, but it's also like we don't know what any of this stuff means or does or is. So that's, again, I hope I can edit this into something coherent, but that's basically my gripe with the story, is that it's not long enough to tell the stories that they need to tell and that they wanted to tell. Again, obviously if they made it longer, people will probably complain that it's too long, but I don't know, if the story was good and coherent and explained all the things that it needed to explain, I feel like the whole plot of the Cloud Striders and Strand and Neomuna could have fit in with the whole bigger narrative of the witness and the veil and all that and Callus. But there is one more thing about the story that I also find super confusing in terms of the expansion story. So after you beat it, you go back to the tower and you speak to Zavala and you speak to Ikora, and Zavala specifically has a line where he basically says the Traveler is gone, even though it's not gone, it's right there above the earth, it's in the directory. So I don't know what that actually means, but there's also this line in the one of the news reports you can read in the like Hall of Heroes area with Jisoo Colorado, where he explains that something about the witness making the portal out of the Traveler's corpse, I think he says is the word that he uses, and it's like, so the Traveler is dead? That's also something that's not explained well or like thoroughly. Is like, okay, so if the Traveler is dead, then how do we still have our powers? And I think some people are saying, well, ghosts and our powers are like our ghost is the thing that gives us our powers, but then in the Red War, when they put a cage on the Traveler, we lose our powers. So wouldn't it being quote unquote dead be even worse than that? Like, I don't know. It's very strange and odd. So yeah, those are basically like my incoherent ramblings about the Lightfall's storyline. I think it needed to be either longer or they needed to cut like the whole strand thing, because it like makes, I'm not gonna say it makes no sense because they kind of explain it with the veil and why we can see it and whatnot, but like with everything that they needed to tell and the things that they wanted to tell, I feel like so many things are clashing together, and they like that priorities of what they want to tell are like disconjointed. It's very weird and strange, as I've said multiple times. And in terms of the storyline for Season of Defiance, which is directly linked to the expansion, you know, having to do with the Shadow Legion and the attack on Earth, simultaneous to what's going on in Neomuna, I feel like I have a lot less to say about this because it's not as, obviously it's not as long as like the expansion, but my biggest gripes with the story for Season of Defiance is that, one, the really big one, has to do with why are the Shadow Legion kidnapping people? Like, if it's just to, like, if this is like a ploy by the Witness to like just demoralize the people of Earth, then that makes sense. But they also don't say that, so we're kind of left with this weird nebulous thing that gives us a reason to have story stuff happen on the Earth and for the season. So like, I want to think that it's literally just the Witness trying to like demoralize anybody who's opposing him, which is basically everybody on Earth. But at the same time, without direct confirmation, that just sounds like I'm coping super hard because I want the story to make sense, which I do. But, and the other major story beat of the Season of Defiance is Amanda dying. Now, personally, I don't have a problem with Amanda dying. I just have a problem in the way that it was portrayed, where like for that mission, you're basically told, hey, this is a trap, and if you proceed, like bad things will happen. Basically, Aramis tells you that. And it's like, I played that mission and I heard that and I was like, okay. And then I started going through the mission and I immediately forgot that it was a trap before like what happens, because there's like nothing in the mission reminding you that, hey, something bad is going to happen. Now maybe that's just me being a brainlet and, you know, I should have remembered that. But like when Amanda dies, it's really weird, and because it just kind of happens. I feel like they could have been like a better way to portray that. So basically you free prisoners in this mission, and basically what happens is that Amanda has to like hack into like the security or like something like that to like let the prisoners out, and she does so, but I guess the building was rigged to explode so that, you know, she was able to do what she needed to do, but there wasn't enough time for her to get out. Which is weird because now that I'm thinking about it, transmat exists, and I know regular humans can transmat. So this is super weird. Again, now that I'm thinking about it. But so yeah, so basically the idea is that she dies, you know, saving people, and because she's not a guardian, you know, that's it for her. And I feel like there were plenty of ways they could have portrayed this. Like they could have, I don't know, because like she opens, like she hacks a thing and lets the prisoners out, and everybody's like, okay, everybody is safe. And then an explosion just kind of happens in the background and she dies. And I feel like they could have, like, I don't know, maybe have like her get cornered in the room with a tormentor or something, like the tormentor that we fight. Or they could have just made the whole, this building is going to explode, more obvious, because once again, at the beginning of the mission, they're like, hey, this is a trap and something bad is going to happen if you proceed. And then that's not brought up again until the end of the mission, where literally the explosion happens. And I feel like if there was like, I don't know, maybe if they had made it like some of the characters notice as like, hey, there's fucking bombs everywhere and they're on a timer. So like, I don't know, they could have just reinforced that like just a little bit more, or they could have done something where like, again, the tormentor is what gets Amanda, because her just dying randomly to an explosion. It's like, it's so sudden and it's so weird that when it happens in the moment, I was just kind of like, oh, that just happened. But yeah, what I will say though, despite those two points of contention with the story for the season, is that the voice acting for the season is super good, along with the you know, with the in-person dialogue and the radio messages, especially some of the radio messages. The latest one we have access to between Crow and Mara, I really like that. radio message a lot. But one more thing to do with the story for the season, and then I'll get into like the gameplay stuff. I really hope that they don't do this, but it seems to be hinted at very strongly that Amanda might get resurrected as a guardian, and I really hope they don't do that, because not only does it undermine like the moments with the characters like mourning, especially Zavala, but like they even mentioned it, like Mara I think even mentions it in one of the random dialogues you can get during the battleground missions, where she basically explains that like even if Amanda did come back as a guardian, she wouldn't be Amanda, she would just be a different person but with Amanda's face. So I really hope they don't do that, but they seem to be hinting at she might come back as a guardian, which granted she totally deserves to, but again I feel like that would undermine a lot of the like grieving and like characters development things that have been going on lately. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see on that front. There's still one more radio message, and like there might be a season finale to this. I was very caught off guard when the season quest line ended, because it's like, oh yeah, I forgot the season stories tied to an expansion are usually shorter than the other ones. But yeah, that's me complaining about this story stuff for the past 40 minutes or however long this will be when I edit it. And just to preface this again, I do like some things about the story, not only about the expansion and the season, but I feel like most of that is like in the like lore stuff and like off-screen stuff that's happening, or like other missions, like exotic missions and whatnot. But like the post-campaign stuff for Lightfall I think is actually really good, and the dialogue for the season I think is also really good. But it's just like the main story stuff that everybody sees for the expansion and the season I feel like are missteps, to say the least. But yeah, now really quickly about some of the gameplay stuff to do with the expansion and the season. This part probably won't be as long, just because I'm not like super in tune with like every nuance of like every single new gameplay system that they've made or introduced with the expansion. But one thing, Strand, you know, has issues in terms of being like its place in the story, but I think as a subclass in terms of the gameplay, it's actually really fun. You know, I'm a Titan main, and while I am simultaneously annoyed at the fact that it's another roaming melee super, I think it is, however, my favorite roaming melee super in the game. I feel like it's super fast, and like the way it synergizes with itself and certain things, it's really fun to like run around and like suspend things and then melee them and do all that with the Titan. Again, I do wish that it was like a bit more creative in terms of like visually what you're doing. You know, maybe they could have, I could have swore at some point before release there was like video of the Titan subclass where he had like a spin attack, and I was like, that seems really cool. Maybe it was probably, I don't know, maybe it just didn't fit with what they wanted the Titan to be able to do in terms of like the gameplay stuff. But I don't know, this is just me, but I feel like maybe it would have been really cool if maybe it had like a spinning like drill, like Giga Drill attack. Maybe it could have replaced like, so I don't know, obviously they wanted it to be able to suspend things with the heavy attack, so I mean maybe you could change the light attack to like a drill or something, or not change it, but like maybe that would have been more visually interesting. I don't know. But you know, those complaints aside, it is probably my favorite roaming super for the Titan. Although Burning Maul will always have a special place in my heart, because you literally just hold a giant hammer and it looks cool. Also, another gameplay thing that they introduced with the expansion, the loadout system. For the most part, I think it's super good and I like it a lot. And it's crazy that it took this long to get into the game, but I'm glad that they finally did it. I will say, however, the seasonal mod system and the loadout system seem to like conflict with one another. I don't mean like glitching or like it breaks or anything like that, but I mean in the sense that it's like you have loadouts for specific builds and they all have, you know, specific mods and things like that. And I feel like the fact that you can only choose certain mods, like certain amount of mods from the seasonal artifact, but they also want you to use the loadout system to switch loadouts on the fly, like it conflicts with that idea, because then you don't always have access to the mods for your specific build. So I often find myself like not making loadouts because I'm like, well, I also want to integrate the seasonal mods into my loadout, but I can't because I don't have enough unlocks to unlock all the mods. which, I mean, it makes sense because they want, like, some of the mods are now like just intrinsically passive when you unlock them. So I guess that's their justification for redoing the whole you can only pick a certain amount, because it used to be you can unlock all of them, but it just took a while, which I actually really liked. But yeah, maybe, I don't know, maybe they'll change that at some point, because I haven't seen anybody talk about this, so maybe I'm alone in this respect, but I really feel like not having access to all the mods on the seasonal artifact conflicts with the build crafting loadout system that they implemented. Also, in terms of build crafting, the new mod system, I'm not super like in tune with like making builds and modding and all that, but I think the general consensus that I've heard from like videos and whatnot is that the mod system is like super, like the mod system is good, but it's been simplified to a point that a lot of the more like complex and unique mods that we used to have are no longer in the game. So I think people are hoping that they introduce more mods over time and like build off of what is currently a good like groundwork for the new mod system. Also, just a small side note, in terms of the season gameplay stuff, just generally, the seasonal activity, I like it a lot. There's tons of ads to kill for everybody in the instance. You're not fighting over kills. Not that that's really been a problem, you know, in the recent past, but like I remember, you know, if you've played Destiny for any amount of time, you probably remember fighting your teammates over kills and like strikes and whatnot. So I'm glad that like ad density is like still a thing that they're keeping up with in all their activities. Also, another thing for the season, I love how many, like, it's not a pain in the ass to like focus engrams or get engrams in the first place. It's like, I think in my war table thing, like I have like 90 something defiant engrams, and it's like, I'm glad like loot is not hard to get for the season. Like there's literally just loot, like seasonal loot at the very least. There's like loot everywhere. Now, I guess I should talk more importantly about like the difficulty of just the game generally. However, I think in the TWAB recently that came out the other day, they are nerfing master and legendary enemies by like 10% in terms of their health. And I think in 3-man activities that have that multiplicity modifier where enemies have more health the more people you have, I think they're also reducing like the effectiveness of that by 30%, I think they said. So hopefully enemies won't be bullet sponges anymore, because unless you're using a special or a machine gun as a primary, shooting enemies in certain content just felt not good with a primary weapon. And I guess generally speaking, for the most part, I like the idea of like certain activities just having like pre-baked like enemy difficulty. Now there's also the discussion to have about, well, if everything has like a preset difficulty, then what is the point of power leveling? And I think that's getting addressed at some point in the near future. I think even next season they're probably not going to raise the level cap, so you know, they're at the very least beginning to try things with the whole power leveling system and everything. But yeah, this really weird like way they went about it in terms of like, okay, what is hard, like what should we make more difficult? And things like plus sectors or legendary versions of missions and raids and master raids and whatnot, and dungeons, I feel like, okay, yeah, those should probably be a bit harder than they currently were, or not currently, than they used to be. But when the day one raid enemies are easier to kill than like legendary exotic mission enemies, or like even like there's a problem there. And especially like on Neomuna, it's like, why is the Neomuna patrol zone minus 15 light level? Like that doesn't make any sense. Like it's a patrol zone, I don't get it. It's like, yes, some content should be harder, but I don't think anybody was complaining about the difficulty of a patrol zone. But like I said, recently they did address that they're going to change a bunch of things about like enemy health and all that. And I think they're also buffing primary weapons, in addition to also buffing some other weapon types like snipers and everything. So yeah, the difficulty like spread of like where they decided to make things hard was very odd. I'm trying to remember other gameplay things that they changed. So I talked about Strand, I talked about loadouts, I talked about mods. I mean, I could talk about Guardian ranks, but I think that's been discussed heavily ad nauseum. Basically, like, I think Guardian ranks are fine, but I don't think they should have any connection or tie in with the commendation system. The commendation system should just be there purely to discern, like, how do I phrase this? Like, I guess the quality of the person that you're playing with in terms of like how good at they are they like nice or whatever? You know what I mean? You know what I'm getting at. But yeah, the fact that that's tied to ranking up your Guardian rank is really odd. It's obvious that they want people to engage with it. So I guess their reasoning is that putting it in the Guardian ranks will, you know, encourage people to engage with the commendation system. But I feel like as we've seen, that just causes people to want to game getting commendations as easy as possible because it's directly linked to a form of progression when it shouldn't be. Oh, they also reworked 2 strikes with the release of Lightfall. I think it's the Arms Dealer and Lake of Shadows. I haven't fully done Lake of Shadows. I rarely ever get it. Although I think that's for the most part because I'm doing the Nightfall whenever I do the Vanguard playlist. But I have done the Arms Dealer because it was also one of the Nightfalls recently. And I think for the most part it's good. It's mostly the same, but I will say that the Threshers, until they were recently nerfed, were a huge issue, and the whole, like, I don't know if Threshers were being affected by the whole frame rate doing more damage the higher it is, or whether that was just unique to Threshers and they were just doing a ton of damage. But either way, yeah, Threshers made that kind of annoying to do. And also Scorpius turrets, as they've always been, are super crazy and ridiculous. That's less egregious than the whole Threshers being unkillable, just roaming nukes basically. Also, I really do hope that they address the whole frame rate damage issue. I think at some point in the past, like the far past, they addressed that, but I don't think they addressed it with every single thing that had an issue with. So yeah, I think the last thing I'll talk about in terms of gameplay is the raid. Now, I haven't personally done the raid, so I'm just formulating my thoughts on what other people have said and, you know, gameplay that I've seen and whatnot. But I think the raid visually and in terms of the lore is really good. Yeah, it's one of the coolest locations a raid has taken place in. It's inside of the Witness's pyramid ship that has been blasted by the Traveler's terraforming beam. I will say the one story thing that has me confused about the raid is that, so in the lore and story and whatnot, it was established that the pyramid on the moon was Nezarek's pyramid, and that's the reason why nightmare stuff happens on the moon, and where that all came from is because Nezarek has to do with like nightmares and like psychic ability and whatnot. So that makes sense, that checks out. And then, you know, after Savathun killed Nezarek, you know, he was, I guess, laid to rest in his pyramid, and I guess Elixir pirates, as we learned in Season of Plunder, like chopped up his body to use his parts as like artifacts of power and whatnot. And then I guess at some point after that, the Witness took Nezarek's head, basically, which was all that was left, and put it in his pyramid, I guess, to like venerate his disciple or something. So I guess maybe what the timeline on that is, like, Savathun kills Nezarek during the collapse, and during the collapse is when the Elixir like chop up his body and take parts. So the Witness is still there because the collapse is currently happening, and then the Witness retrieves Nezarek's body and puts it in his pyramid ship instead. I think that checks out in my brain. Whether or not that's actually true, I have no idea. So maybe this will get revealed at some point, but currently I'm not sure if there's a reason as to why the Traveler shot the pyramid's ship with its terraforming thing, because obviously it doesn't do damage to anything. It literally grows plants out of nothing because, you know, the Traveler's a terraformer. But like, did the Traveler know Nezarek was on there? And if it did, why would it purposefully resurrect Nezarek? It's like, do we need to kill him for a specific reason that has to do with the Traveler trying to help us, like, post-mortem? Or is, like, that's part about the raid in terms of its story that's always confused me. Is like, why would the Traveler purposefully shoot the pyramid and resurrect Nezarec, unless the Traveler didn't do that on purpose, in which case that's a goofy accident for like an omnipotent space terraformer being to make. But I don't know, maybe I'm just looking too much into it, but it's still confusing. But enough about the story about the raid. In terms of like the gameplay, it seems like a lot of the encounters, besides the third encounter, like the mechanics are like really simple and there's not a lot of them. In fact, the first, second, and last encounter all share the same mechanic. Now it does get slightly more complex with the Flux of Darkness and the, I don't remember what the light version is called, but the light version of the buff. But that's like really about it for a majority of the encounters, and then the third encounter is completely different, which is super weird. But yet, like from what I've seen and from what I've heard other people say, it's like the mechanics are so not complicated that you can have, what is it, 1 or 2 people do the mechanics for the 3 encounters, and everybody else is literally just on ad clear, which is not something I think you want your raid, you know, the high end of PvE content to be, regardless of whether or not it's supposed to be like a beginner friendly raid or not. Because while it is relieving as a new player in a raid to be like, okay, you don't have to do anything super complicated, you can just clear ads, I feel like there is a point of mechanical complexity that people do want to engage with, even if they are new. And like, I feel like even, or maybe I'm crazy, but I feel like even like, is VoG more complex in terms of its like main mechanic? I have no idea. But like, I don't know, maybe like something like Scourge of the Past even has like more complicated mechanics than Rise of Nightmares does. Is that what it's called? Rise of Nightmares? I don't even remember. I just remember it in my brain as RON. But yeah, I think my biggest issue with the raid is not even that it's like easy, but it's like the mechanics are so not in depth to the point that you only need like a few people to actually do the mechanics, again, except for the third encounter. And if you try to have more people help with the mechanic, then it actually becomes more of a hindrance than like helping. And I guess the last thing I'll say about the raid is I'll talk about Nezarec himself, you know, the final god of not being able to get on a plate. But I think overall Nezarec's design is fine, like just visually speaking. Although I do kind of wish we got the version where, in the concept art, where he has like a giant cloak on, but I feel like they didn't do that because, you know, physics. But a lot of people complain about like the way that he looks visually in terms of like his body. But I don't know, I feel like it's fine because it contrasts with the Rolk, who's like super tall and like lanky, and then Nezarec is like big, to make an understatement. But I also feel like, you know, his like big and maybe bloated is not the right word, but the general impression I got from like the way he looks visually is that like the light and the dark in him that like, you know, grew his new body is like rejecting him. So that's why his body is like weird and deformed looking. And that's like when you go to do DPS and the giant dark or like light beam shines on him. That's kind of like the light and the dark are both rejecting his body and being like, yeah, neither of us like this dude. Please murder him for the love of God. But I think generally, visually, Nezarec is fine. He's a bit cartoonish in terms of his like dialogue and like being a villain and whatnot, but I think that's fine. I don't really mind that as much as other people do. I will say though, in terms of the Tormentors and Nezarec, because their one is based off the other, you kind of wish that they had more like attacks. Because the Tormentor, in my mind, if I'm remembering this correctly, he has a projectile. He has the projectile spawn thing that shoots a bajillion projectiles, which is super annoying. And he also has a grab. Now, I'm not sure if the Tormentor has like physical swings with his weapon, or whether that's just him shooting the projectile point blank at your face and it just looks like he's swinging his weapon. I might be wrong about that, but again, I don't remember. Now, I don't know about you, but when they were originally showing off the Tormentors, and it was like, they really highlighted the fact that, oh, it has like a grab attack that is like super like bad and you don't want to get grabbed by. I was surprised to learn that when the fact that the Tormentors are based off of Nezarec, and then you go to the raid and you fight Nezarec and he doesn't have a grab attack at all. And I was like, this is a small thing, but I feel like it probably would have done more to like make him scary, like in terms of something to fight, and it would have made sense from like a lore perspective because the Tormentors also have that attack, but the thing that they're based off doesn't. It's very weird, but yeah, that's more of like a small nitpick, but I do wish he had a grab attack. But what is this recording at? It's like an hour and 20 minutes and I still have to edit it, so I think that's where I'm going to leave my thoughts for now. Just TLDR summarize. I do think Lightfall is a good expansion only for the amount of gameplay stuff that they introduced, because I feel like the story, at least the upfront story with the campaign and the seasonal story, are not up to snuff to what people were expecting, myself included. But yeah, I think overall the expansion is fine. It is not the story that a lot of us were expecting, and that sucks. Now granted, there is still going to be seasonal story stuff occurring that will hopefully explain things that were not explained in the campaign, but I hope, like, my general thoughts on the story going forward is that I hope Lightfall and Season of Defiance are a hiccup in terms of what was otherwise pretty good storytelling so far up to this point, and that it's not an indication of where things are heading in terms of quality. Because once again, Witch Queen is like one of the most praised stories for a Destiny expansion since like Forsaken, and the seasons leading up to Lightfall and even leading up to Witch Queen were all really good for the most part. So I hope Season of the Deep and the other seasons and the Final Shape are all on par with the quality that people are expecting in terms of story. But yeah, story stuff, not that great. Gameplay stuff, for the most part, is generally pretty good. There are also big changes coming soon with Season of the Deep in terms of gameplay changes. So yeah, I think gameplay is Lightfall's biggest strong suit, and the narrative sadly kind of took like, not a backseat, but it was just not as cohesive. But yeah, it's currently 12:50, and I still need to go edit this, so I think it's gonna do it for me for today. If you enjoyed my incoherent ramblings about dumb video game things that don't matter, then liking the video would be very appreciated, and so is subscribing to the channel. But yeah, I'm not sure if this is gonna go up on Friday or Saturday. Depends on how much I edit it after the fact. But yeah, bye-bye.